Yo, what's good on snipers, and welcome to our Colorado Avalanche Franchise Mode recap. So over the last maybe week and a half or so, I've been basically simulating the last 12 seasons of this GM mode. I think it's 12 seasons or so, all the way from 2030-31 all the way to the 2042-43 season. So I'm going to give you guys a bit of a recap of what happened, like who we drafted and stuff like that. Players we signed, players we let go of, players who retired, all that sort of thing, so you guys can kind of get a feel for what happened in the NHL and whatnot. So first, in the 2030-31 NHL draft, since that's where we kind of left off, because we just basically came off our loss to the San Jose Sharks in the first round. So at the 23rd pick, we decided to draft Nicholas Blum, who was a medium top 6 forward, 64 overall. We also grabbed at 85th a 47 overall sniper, 47 overall sniper who was medium elite in Tim Laws. So that guy was a very good prospect coming up, but it would take quite a few years for him to actually get to the NHL, but you'll find out more about him later. At the re-sign stage, we did decide to lose, though, Justin McArdle, so we dropped him to free agency, and he would sign with our rival in St. Louis for 2 years at $2.27 million. Then we also decided this one was a very tough one, but we had to do it because of our prospects, though, in the system. So we released Alexander Zubov, and Zubov would sign in Carolina for 5 years at $6.225 million. So he was getting paid pretty good money, and I think he even got first or second line ice time in Carolina, so that was good for him. In free agency, we decided to sign Pierre Huet, who was an 85 overall for 2 years, basically to replace Chris Drury, because Chris Drury was on the decline a bit. And then we decided that we might as well trade Chris Drury because we had a lot of center depth, so we sent him to Buffalo just because it would be more realistic that way. We sent him there for a first round pick. They actually even wanted him for some reasons, so it would be just kind of cool to send him to a team that he actually played for, so that's what we did. Now we get on to the 2031-32 season simulations. So defenseman Stu DiPietro, if you guys remember him, he grew from I think an 85 or something, but he grew all the way to an 87 overall. So he was listed technically as the top 2 defenseman, and then he would be the guy that would be playing alongside of Sam Strudwick instead of Mark Darmour. Sam Strudwick was named captain after Drury left, just because obviously he was the obvious choice for it. He was a very good player for us, so I had to choose him. Former goaltender Toby Hines apparently didn't re-sign in San Jose after his cup win, though, which is kind of crazy. And he did decide to sign with the New Jersey Devils, so he went, basically he only played with San Jose for 3 seasons, so basically that compensation we got, I think in a way was worth it for both teams, because San Jose went on to win the Stanley Cup, and then us, I think we won a cup during that span as well, so it was a good trade all around. To finish the regular season, we went 44, 22, 14, and 2, which was good for 4th place in the entire league with 102 points. We were averaging 2.62 goals for per game, which was not really that good, so our offense was really struggling at number 21 out of 31 teams, so I wish this team would have scored a lot more, but this team was very good defensively, because Ross Carter was just a brick, and we also had a really good defensive core, so we only allowed 2.01 goals per game, so that 2.62, even though it was one of the worst in the league, it looks pretty good compared to the 2.01. On the power play, we clicked at 18.9%, which was not the greatest, but not the worst either. Then on the penalty kill, we kind of struggled a bit, going 79.6%, so that's something we needed to fix a bit going into the playoffs. Ross Carter had a fabulous season, going 36, 15, and 2 with 9 shutouts, a 941 save percentage, and a 1.72 goals against average. In the playoffs, in the first round, we would face off against the Chicago Blackhawks, but we would lose the series in 6 games after blowing a 2-1 series lead. So it was, just not a good season. We had a good offensive season, or not good offensive season, a good defensive season, but then we just could not get it done in the playoffs. We had a 2-1 series lead, like I was saying, and then we lost the next 3 games, and we were out in round 1 against Chicago, who actually never won a Stanley Cup, I think, in this entire GM mode, which is kind of crazy. So notable awards this season, so Germany would win the Stanley Cup over Chris Drury and the Buffalo Sabres, so Chris Drury would go back to the Cup Finals again, so he's been to tons of Cup Finals, 4 or 5 with us, and then he also just went to one with Buffalo there, so he's been in a lot of playoff games. Goaltender Ross Carter, though, even though we lost in the first round, he takes home the Hart, the Vezina, the Jennings, and the Lindsay, so he has a good year of awards because he was like one of the best players that season. Unfortunately, we just could not get that Stanley Cup as well. So at the 2032 draft, we actually picked up 3 key pieces that would help us out in a couple years down the road. So at number 25 with our own pick, we would draft Tyrone Sabrin, who was a medium top 6 forward, 63 overall. And then with the pick, though, we got from Buffalo for the Chris Drury trade, so basically straight up for Chris Drury, we got Noel Tamara, who was a 75 overall low elite guy. He became more of a fourth liner later in his career, but like still he was a good player. I'll get to his stats and stuff down the road too. And then with our, I think it's our second round pick at 56th, we picked up a huge steal. We picked up a center sniper in Henrik Hjalmarsson, who was a 69 overall medium elite. This guy was a beast. When you guys hear his stats, you're going to be like, damn, this guy's pretty good. Like, I wish you guys would have gotten to witness his stats and stuff like that, but we never got to see him retired too because he wasn't even that old by the end of this GM mode, so who knows what could have happened, but I'll get to his stats later in the episode. At free agency, we would sign center Raimo Kuda, who had just won the Lady Byng in St. Louis. We would also trade Vyacheslav Zadorov, so our third line and fourth line center kind of guy that we drafted. We decided to trade him to the New York Islanders for a second and a fifth round pick, just because like we were getting way too much prospects jumping into the NHL when we needed to move out players. And then we also traded Goulet, who was the guy that was in the AHL. Like, the AHL team signed him because they didn't have enough forwards or something. He eventually actually grew to an 81, so we were able to flip him to Boston for a third-round pick and a fifth-round pick in 2033. So we added a couple more picks into the system just so we can maybe get some new good prospects in a couple years. Now into the 2032-33 season. So to start off the season, we kind of like struggled a bit, or we were actually doing really good, I think it was. And then Ross Carter basically went down with an injury and missed pretty much the entire month of November, and the team really struggled without him. Like, he was basically the rock that would keep this team from allowing goals, and without him, like, the team just did not do good that month. So we kind of fell back to around 500 then, but once Ross Carter came back, we started playing good again. So the team would finish 43, 27, 7, and 5, which was good for 7th place in the entire league. We had 93 points. Once again, we kind of struggled in terms of offense. We only scored 2.67 goals for per game, which was good for 19th. So it was a bit of a step up from last season, but it was still not very good. We did continue to play really good defensively, though, as we had a 2.33 goals against average, which was good for 3rd. So it wasn't the best because there was actually a decent amount of goaltenders, it seemed like, in this franchise mode that all were like really good and won multiple Vezinas. So yeah, I think either Carolina or St. Louis was the team that finished first this year. I'm not 100% sure who did. Our power play once again also kind of struggled. It was 19.9%, so it was, I think, a bit better from last year, but it was still not the greatest. And our penalty kill was actually okay, I think, as well, 81.6%, so not too bad. Our leader in points this season was Sam Strudwick with 18 goals, 49 assists for 67 points, so the defenseman leading us in points. So that's not a good sign when your defenseman is leading you in points. Pretty much means the rest of your team is not doing so well. Like, I think we didn't have the greatest depth scoring or something, but yeah, Sam Strudwick was our best player that season. In the playoffs, we would face off against the St. Louis Blues, but we would lose in 7 games. We almost erased a 3-0 series deficit, but we lost in Game 7, so it really sucked because like we were almost coming back all the way, and then we lost just in that final game, or else we could have moved on to the second round. Former prospect Brandon Morrow was also in St. Louis at that time, so like if you guys remember that Brandon Morrow guy, he had elite potential, but he never reached it, so we traded him when his trade value was high. We also another former 2 players actually were also in St. Louis, and that was Justin McCardle, who I mentioned a couple seasons ago, and Sergei Tudin was there as well. So all 3 of those guys moving on to the second round. So notable awards for that season, the Stanley Cup was won by the Dallas Stars, who actually also won the President's Trophy, so that says who finished first in the league. I think it was Esteban Thorne who took out the Vezina. Despite Ross Carter being really good, Esteban Thorne was even better apparently. So yeah, Dallas beat out Boston in that Stanley Cup Finals. At the 2033 draft, we would also pick up some good pieces. Like there's two pieces that actually made the NHL, one didn't, which was kind of annoying, but he was maybe more of a depth guy. So at 25th, we would draft Christian Petterstrom, who was a medium top 6 forward prospect. He actually would make it to the NHL. At 51st, we drafted a two-way defenseman who was a low elite 64 overall. This guy never really panned out. He grew, I think, to a high at 78. And yeah, he never really played much for us at all. But at number 56, we would draft a medium starter in Magnus Lindberg. This guy would eventually become our backup in I think it's like in 5 years or so, but he would be our backup for like the last few seasons of this GM mode. At the resign stage, we would release Kyle Laddie and our goaltender, like our backup goaltender, Vic Graves. We'd also release defenseman Yuri Ulanov and center Pierre Huet. Laddie would sign in Washington for 3 years at $2.61 million. Ulanov would sign in St. Louis for 4 years at $4.305. Graves would sign in Phoenix for 2 years at 1.35, and Huet would sign in Czech Republic for 2 years at 2.47. So like Huet was on the decline. Graves we needed to get rid of because I think we had a goaltender prospect as a backup that was ready to go. Yeah, I think we did. And then Ulanov, we just needed to make more space in the lineup as well. Same with Laddie. In free agency, we would sign backup goaltender Omar Klein, depth defenseman Angelo Marquardt, and a top 6 defenseman in Declan Hillis. We would also have to trade away Gaspard Boudreau, if you guys remember that guy. We would have to trade him to New Jersey for a second round pick just to free up roster space for prospects, because we had like a lot of prospects coming into the system every single year, and we had to like get rid of somebody, even as hard as it was, because a lot of these guys were there when you guys were watching, and I just didn't want to move anybody really. So in the 2033-34 season, we also had to make a trade in the preseason, so we had to trade away Hunter Finger just because he would have been a depth forward if we would have like had to play him, because we had so much prospects coming into the system, like I was just saying, that we had to kind of flip players even though we didn't want to. So Hunter Finger was one of those guys. We had to trade him to the New York Islanders for a 3rd-round pick in 2034. Rookies Henrika Hjalmarsson, Sawyer McCulloch, and Dory Nichols all made the NHL. So Henrika Hjalmarsson, who I was just mentioning like a couple seasons ago, who we drafted at like a 69 overall in the 2nd round, he's up to an 83 in his first season. I think he's only 20 years old at this point in time. Sawyer McCulloch is up to an 82. Dory Nichols is up to an 82 as well. So we got 3 great prospects jumping into the NHL. So our AHL is also pretty stacked. Like there's nobody below a 70, which is pretty crazy for an AHL team. So both of our teams looking very good for the season. We would finish the season 49-24, 7-2, which was good for 2nd place in the entire league with 105 points. Our goals for went way up in comparison to the past 2 seasons. We would average 3.27 goals for per game, which was good for 2nd in the league. Our goals against was still playing pretty much rock solid. We would only allow 2.35 goals against per game, which was good for 3rd place, just like last year. We also had a very good power play this year, going 22.7%, and our penalty kill was 84.2%, so literally everything was clicking on this team. Rookie Henrika Hjalmarsson finished as the point leader for the team with 36 goals, 33 assists for 69 points, and he was on the 3rd line, and he also played on the 2nd line power play that entire season, which is crazy. Like this guy literally comes into the lineup, doesn't get as much ice time as like a top line center, but he just like rips it up. Apparently no forward also had no less than 20 points that season, and there was 7 players on this team with 62 plus points, so it was a very good season for offense, and this team was looking definitely like they wanted to win a Stanley Cup. Ross Carter also posted a career high of 12 shutouts this season, which is something that he never did before. Like the most I think he had prior to this was like 6 or something, but then all of a sudden he just whipped out 12 shutouts. And yeah, it was a really crazy season for him. Now into the playoffs, we would face off against the Detroit Red Wings in the 1st round, and we would get past them with ease. And compared to like the early years when we had to face like Yzerman and whatnot, we would defeat them in 5 games and outscore them 15-9 in the series. So we just scored a lot of goals, And yeah, we kind of played good defensively as well. Maybe not the greatest, but we managed to hold them off. And yeah, Vyacheslav Zadorov is actually on Detroit as well in this series, so that's kind of interesting. He was playing on their third line as an 83 overall. We would move on to round 2, where we would face off against the Vancouver Canucks, and Hjalmarsson would be pretty insane, as he would score the Game 7 OT winner to get us to the conference finals. He would score his 11th goal in 12 games in this playoff run. Our top line of Kuda, Galchenyuk, and Keefe was comprised for 13 points in Game 1, so like those three guys had a lot of points in the first game of the series, and that kind of set the tone a bit, and we would win in 7. And move on to the round 3, where we would face off against the Phoenix Coyotes. We would win this series in 6 games, as Sam Strudwick would get the OT winner to send us to the Stanley Cup Finals for the 5th time in the series. Now into the Stanley Cup Finals, we'd face off against the Carolina Hurricanes, who had Alexander Zubov, who I had mentioned we released a couple years prior to this. We were down 3-1 in this series. We managed to force a Game 7, but then we lost in Game 7, which was a very big blow to the team, because this team should have technically won a Stanley Cup, because like Henrik Hjalmarsson in his rookie season scored 20 playoff goals in I think it was like 23 games or something like that. Like, this guy literally broke the record for most goals in a playoff, and like, yeah, he was just insane, and like the entire team was doing really well. It's just we lost that one last game, or else we would have won the Stanley Cup against Carolina. So yeah, Zubov basically took home, I think, his 3rd Stanley Cup that year. So as I was saying, Carolina beats us in Game 7, but their goaltender was an 82 overall in comparison to Ross Carter's 96. So yeah, that was kind of weird that we lost because of that. Like, we had a better team because of Ross Carter, but apparently their 82 overall goaltender could outduel Ross Carter pretty easily. Ross Carter also missed out on the Vezina despite having 12 shutouts, because goaltender Voloshenko for the St. Louis Blues was insane as well. Sam Strudwick would take home his 3rd Norris Trophy and his first since 2026-27, so almost in 10 years. Rookie Henrik Hjalmarsson would take home the Calder with a great rookie season and an insane nearly point-per-game playoffs. Like, if we would have won the Stanley Cup, he would have won the Conn Smythe, and I've only had one other rookie win a Conn Smythe in a playoff series before, and that was back in my Vancouver mode in NHL 17 when Mikhail Abeline won, so this guy was something special, and you could see it easily. At the 2034 draft, we would draft Igor Chubarov, who was a medium top 6 defenseman only, and in the first round, so it was a pretty bad pick. But he was actually kind of a higher up medium top 6, and he actually got to the NHL as well, so that was good. We'd also draft Igor Svitov, who was like a career AHL guy, and Antoine Desharnais, who was also an AHL guy. To make rooms for youngsters Tamura and Blum, we would have to let go of Chris Petrovic, who, if you guys remember, was that depth kind of guy that we signed for quite a few years. He was originally drafted by the Dallas Stars, but yeah, we had to let him go. We also decided to release depth defenseman Dominic Puck. And we also released the goaltender Omar Klein, who we signed for that one season. He would go on to sign in St. Louis for 2 years at $1.45 million. And yeah, basically our goaltender prospect Tamara is ready for the NHL, so that's why we would let go of Klein. At free agency, we would sign depth forward Will Whitman, and we would also have to trade away Gavin Okposo at preseason due to the excessive amounts of forwards that were coming into the NHL, just to make more room. So we had to trade him to Germany for a 3rd and a 4th. And yeah, I think at this upcoming season, he actually went to the Cup Finals with Germany, so yeah, it was a good trade for him. So the 2034-35 season, we had rookies Blum, Tamura, and Tamara. I know it's 2 different people. It just seems weird. But anyways, all 3 of those guys make the NHL. So Mark Darmore played his 1,000th game this season, so that was a big milestone for him in his career. So Ross Carter also missed 3 weeks with an injury in December, and then he also missed a week in March with an injured hand. Then late in March, he re-bruised that hand to the end of April. So as a result, we had to rely on Tamara for the first round of the playoffs, which was kind of iffy, going with a little backup guy to take over for that. So our leader in points was once again Henrik Hjalmarsson for the 2nd straight season in his career. with 39 goals, 38 assists for 77 points. We would finish the season 42, 26, 11, and 3, which is good for 6th place. So it was a bit of a drop off from the year before, but we only had 95 points. So like the league didn't have there was one team that pretty much ran away with the points this season. I forget who it was. We would average 2.9 goals for per game, which was good for 13th. So we kind of struggled a bit offensively in comparison to the previous season. Our goals against was still decent. It was number 7. Like, it was kind of dropping back a bit because Ross Carter was dropping in age a bit, or he was going up in age. So yeah, we had a 2.51 goals against per game. Our power play was pretty good, 21.3%, but our penalty kill was just the most iffiest thing, going 78.2%. That was our main concern going into the playoffs. And once again, Ross Carter had a very good season despite his injury problems. Like, he still won games. Even at his age, he just still got wins when he needed to. So in round 1, we would face off against the Chicago Blackhawks, and we would defeat them in a 7-game series as Ross Carter would return for Game 7. So Tamara basically played good enough to get it to a Game 7 where Ross Carter came back from injury and won us the series. So it was a pretty good little storybook ending for that first round. In round 2, we would face off against the Los Angeles Kings, and we would win this series in 5 games. Rylan Keefe had a really hot hand this entire series and in the first 2 rounds, as he has 4 game-winning goals in 2 rounds. So this guy was getting us the wins when we needed to. We would move on to the conference finals where we would face off against Germany and Gavin Okposo, who we dealt in the preseason. So it was like, goddamn, we have to go up against Okposo. And yeah, Germany was really stacked, and we would lose to them in 5 games because they made mincemeat out of a good team. So yeah, it really sucked that that happened. 4 of those 5 games, though, went to overtime. So we literally lost by 1 goal in all those games, because literally it was a 1-goal game every single game. And that's ridiculous that 4 of the 5 went to overtime. So literally, if we would have won all those overtime games, we would have won the series. But we just could not get those clutch goals when we needed to. Like, Keefe didn't get any more like he did in the first 2 rounds. So in the Stanley Cup Finals, the New York Islanders would win over the Germans. So the Islanders would capture their first and only Stanley Cup of this build. On to the 2035 draft, we would draft Emiliano Dodge, who was a low elite defenseman. I think he made top 6, being a top 6, but I don't think he got any better than that. And then we would also draft center Nikita Afinogenov, who was a medium top 9 forward. This guy, I don't even remember if we even signed, but he didn't really turn out to be anything at all either. At the re-sign stage, we had released defenseman Declan Hills as well as center Bryant Pierce. If you guys remember him, he was like a 4th-line forward for us. He didn't really pan out to be anything. We would have to release him because of youngsters coming up, so we'd release him and he would sign in Calgary for 2 years at only $1.46 million, so he went to another Western Conference team. In free agency, we would sign depth defenseman Alexander Vasilyev. So the 2035-36 season was a bit of a tough one. We had to make a couple big trades at the start of the season just because we had a lot more youngsters jumping into the NHL, and when that happens, you kind of have to shift around the team a bit. So we would flip away Rylan Keefe during the preseason for a 2nd and a 3rd. He would go to Germany. We would also have to deal Rylan Galchenyuk, who was just like kind of eating up minutes a bit, which was a bit much for him because he was an 85 third-line checking forward, so I didn't really know where to slot him in. And he wasn't really doing the greatest offensively, like he was kind of dropping off in production a lot. So we would trade him to the Boston Bruins for a 1st-round pick and a 5th-round pick in 2036. And then we also would have to trade away Alvin Legwand, who you guys I don't think really saw much of, but we'd have to trade him to fill in for a depth forward in Marcus Forsberg and a 3rd and a 5th-round pick. So we got a decent amount of returns for those 3 guys, but it really sucked having to let them go. So Christian Petterstrom, who I mentioned we drafted a couple seasons ago, he would replace Rylan Keefe, and then also Tim Law, who I mentioned way back, who was like a 47 overall medium elite guy that was at the draft. He would replace Galchenyuk. Legwand would be replaced by Frederick Obergauer, who played with us for a couple seasons as well, so 3 more guys jumping into the lineup. So Sam Starbuck would lace up in his 1,000th game this season, and that was against the Buffalo Sabres on December the 20th, 2035. Our leader in points this season kind of surprised us, and it was the veteran Valery Gerbeshkov, who finished with 23 goals, 47 assists for 70 points. Our season stats, we finished 45-28, 8-1, finishing 5th in the entire league with 98 points. Our offense was really good again, going 3.07 goals for per game, which was good for 7th. We had a 2.61 goals against average, which was good for 7th as well. Our power play percentage wasn't the greatest, 19.6%, but our penalty kill was better from last year, going 82.5%. In the playoffs, we'd face off against the Chicago Blackhawks in the first round of the playoffs. But Tony Jokela, if you guys remember him, he just was getting into the NHL, I think, when the last season you guys watched. Anyways, he was hurt in Game 5 for a week, so he basically our team kind of struggled a bit because of that, but we still managed to win the series in 6 games, and 3 of those 6 games went to overtime, so it was a pretty tight series. So in round 2, we faced off against the Edmonton Oilers, and we had a 3-1 series lead, and then we dropped 3 games in a row, and it kind of shocked our team a bit, and we lost in 7 games. Jokela missed game 1, but he returned for game number 2 because of his injury he got in that first round. Sam Strudwick was insane this entire playoff run. Like, in game 4 of the second round, he had 5 assists. So, like, I've never seen a defenseman get 5 assists in a playoff game. But yeah, Sam Strudwick did that. Unfortunately, we just could not get to that conference finals. Like, this team was playing really good, but we just dropped 3 games at the worst point in time possible. So Finland would go on to win the Stanley Cup against Edmonton, so we would lose to the best Western Conference team. So yeah, Finland won that in 4 games. They would go 16-4 over the postseason, so it only took them 20 games to win a Stanley Cup, which would be insane. And yeah, Mika Kiprusoff would actually take home a Stanley Cup as the backup goaltender. Alvin Legwand, who was dealt in the preseason, would win the Stanley Cup, so another one of our players going on to win a Stanley Cup or getting close to it. Due to the trades at the preseason, we would have a shit ton of picks this year, 13 to be exact, so we had 2 first-rounders, 2 second-rounders, 3 third-rounders, 1 fourth, 3 fifth-rounders, 1 sixth, and 1 seventh. Like, we had a lot of picks in this year's draft. I don't even think any of those guys panned out, but still pretty crazy. So the first round pick from Boston that we got for Rylan Galchenyuk became 12th overall, so that was pretty nice. So with that 12th overall pick, we drafted George Zanin, who was a 65 overall medium top 6 forward. He didn't really play that much, like he played maybe 2 seasons with us near the end, but I never tracked his stats even, so... But yeah, anyways, we picked up him. And then at number 25, we drafted Nick Parse, who was a 64 overall medium top 6 forward prospect. I don't even know if this guy even panned out. I can't remember. I don't think he did. Like, maybe he was on the top line AHL, but I think that was it. At the re-sign stage, we would release Raimo Kuda, who would sign for 4 years in Finland just after they came off that Stanley Cup win. He would sign there for $2.36 million, so a pretty good bargain for Finland. In free agency, we would not make any moves because we had so much young guys still jumping up into the system. So the 2036-37 season, we started to see some decline in our veteran guys. So Sam Strudwick would stay at an 89 overall, but his potential would drop from an exact elite to an exact top 4 defenseman. Mark Darmour would also stay the same potential, which was the exact top 4 defenseman, but he would drop from 86 overall to an 84 overall. Israel Henry, who, if you guys remember, we picked up from the Czech Republic quite a few years back, he dropped from a top 4 defenseman to a top 6 defenseman, and he was only an 81 overall in comparison to his 83 the year prior. And Ross Carter did not make any changes in his overall, so this guy looked like he was poised to play for like another 10 years. Our leader this season was Henrik Hjalmarsson again with 94 points in 82 games, and 61 of those were goals, which was insane. This would be the year he would win the Maurice Richard because he won 2 of them in his career. This was one of them, 61 goals. Like, I've never seen really much players score 60 goals in a franchise mode, but this guy did it. We also had 2 other guys put up a lot of points this season that are worth note. So Grabeshkov continued to have his like midlife crisis, and he put up 90 points this season in 82 games. So that was 20 points above what he put up last year where he led the team. And then Sam Strudwick, despite being like getting up there in age, like I think he was like 34, 35 at this point in time, he put up 84 points in 82 games, which was a career high for him. Like, he had 26 goals, 58 assists for 84 points. He was more than poised to win another Norris Trophy. We would finish the season 49, 26, 4-3, which was great for second place in the entire league with 102 points. We were the first best offensive team with 3.35 goals per game, And our defense was very good as well. Our goaltending, 2.3 goals against per game. Our power play was insane, going 26.7%, which was good for first place, I think. And our penalty kill was 83.2%. So on to the playoffs. In round 1, we would take on the Edmonton Oilers. This was actually kind of a crazy series, even though we lost in 5 games. Because in Game 5, in the third period, we led 4-1 in the game. Then all of a sudden we went up 5-2, and then it was like, okay, we should be in the driver's seat. But then all of a sudden, Ross Carter just completely does not play like Ross Carter. He surrenders 5 goals in the final 12 minutes of the game, and we would lose 7-5 in the series in 5 games. So literally, we looked like we were going to be going to a potential Game 6 to try and tie the series. But instead, this team decides to let in 5 goals in 12 minutes in the third period on home ice, I think, too. Yeah, I think that was on home ice as well. So yeah, it was just not a great way to end the series, and it was like, goddamn, we were technically that close to maybe making it. Like, we could have tied the series if we would have won to 6 games, probably, but this team decided to blow it. But in Game 4 of that series, Sam Sturdwick was pretty good. He had a hat-trick in that game, and he also had 1 assist. So I've never seen a defenseman get a hat-trick in the playoffs before, but he did so that was pretty good. So yeah, despite having such a good regular season, we just could not outscore the Oilers, as we got outscored 18-12 in only 5 games. So the main reason we lost that series was because Ross Carter kind of like showed his age a lot more than he should have. So anyways, Czech Republic would take home the Stanley Cup, their second to be exact, beating out the Dallas Stars. So retirements for the season, Vyacheslav Zadorov, our former player, would retire with the New York Islanders, posting up 1,047 games played, 135 goals, 332 assists for 467 points. So he was not a very good first-round pick, because he was a first-round pick of us back in, I think it was year number 1 or 2. Another former player in Ralph Culp also retires, but as a free agent. He played 960 games with 109 goals, 219 assists for 328 points, as well as former Avalanche Justin McArdle, who was, I think it was their third-line guy, if not mistaken. He would retire with the Dallas Stars, playing 895 games with 57 goals, 228 assists for 285 points. Another former Avalanche in Kyle Laddie would retire with Toronto. That was one of our top 6 defensemen. He played 973 games with 34 goals, 94 assists for 128 points, so a very good defensive defenseman. And then also another former prospect of ours actually retired, and that was Dmitry Vishnevsky, if you guys remember that goaltender prospect. I think we drafted him back in year number 1, but he would retire with New Jersey with 536 games played, going 187, 257, and 27. He'd also pick up 27 shutouts, a .903 save percentage, and a 2.99 goals against average, and he also had 13 assists, so not too bad for him. Well, actually, it was pretty bad for him. Like, he was one of the worst goaltenders, probably. Like, I don't know if he would have been better with us, but he just did not play good with the teams he played with. At the 2037 draft, with our 26th overall pick, we would draft Griffin Guite, who was another medium top 6'4" prospect. This guy was a power forward. I don't think he ever made it by the end of this GM mode, which really sucked, but whatever. At the resign stage, we would have to release our backup goaltender in Tamara, because Lindbergh, who I mentioned earlier, who we drafted like in the 3rd round, he was ready to take over for that role. Like, he was like up to an 82 when he was playing in the AHL, so we decided to let go of Tamara, and Lindbergh would jump in. In free agency, we would not sign anybody, but former goaltender Tamara would sign with the Edmonton Oilers for 2 years at $3.78 million. So the 2037-38 season, we suffered a bit more drop-off from Israel Henry, as he would drop to a 79 overall and an exact AHL top 2 defenseman, so this was more than likely his last season. Rookie forward Neil Ballard would make the NHL as a 79 overall low top 6 forward, so we had actually a low top 6 make it into the lineup. I don't even remember when we drafted him, but it was good to see him making the NHL. Despite having champion status, we would start the season very slowly. Like, we would go 1-8-3 in our first 12 games, and our goaltenders would struggle a lot this season, but the team would literally just barely make the playoffs by the end of it. We finished the season 36, 32, 12, and 2, which was good for 15th, so we had a very tough season this year. We put up only 84 points as well. Our goals for per game, which was really bad, was 2.77, which is good for 22nd in the entire league. Our goals against, like I said, was way up in comparison to previous years. It went up to a 2.88 goals against, which was 18th in the entire league. Our power play was okay, going 20.3%, but our penalty kill was the worst penalty kill I've ever seen, 75.6%. So yeah, the penalty kill might have dragged down the team a lot, and the goaltending performance for sure as well. The leader in points was Henrik Hjalmarsson once again, putting up 44 goals, 40 assists for 84 points. By the end of the regular season, Sam Sturdwick could drop to an 86 overall, Mark Darmour would drop to an 83, and Israel Henry would drop to a 77. So our defensemen were starting to show their age, and they were dropping off in terms of overall. In round 1, we would face off against the Los Angeles Kings, and Henrik Hjalmarsson would put up 10 points in 7 games in the first round to get us onto the second round. Now in the second round, we would face off against the Calgary Flames, and we would lose to them in 7 games, which was a big shock to us, kind of, because their starting goaltender was out with an injury. So literally they had only I think they had 282 overall goaltenders in net or something like that, but they were without their 86 or so starter, and they somehow still beat us. So we would lose in the second round, unfortunately, once again. So this team kind of struggled to get on past that second round like they did earlier in this GM mode. Or I should say, unlike what they did earlier in this GM mode. So the retirements for this season, so we did lose Israel Henry at 36 years old. He played just between us and Czech Republic. He played 1,277 games played with 107 goals, 117 assists for 224 points. So he was a very good defensive defenseman, but yeah, it just really sucked that he started dropping off a lot in the final few years, so we couldn't get him another Stanley Cup, but he won a couple with us. Another former player in Yuri Ulnov retired with Chicago at 36 years old. He played 915 games with 17 goals, 127 assists for 144 points. Another former player, Amari Roach, who, if you guys remember, we drafted. We had him as like a depth kind of guy for a few years. He retired at 34 years old with the New York Islanders. He played 692 games with 17 goals, 81 assists for 98 points, so just shy of 100. So by the end of all that, Sam Sturdwick would drop to an 83 overall at 34 years of age. Mark Darmour would drop to an 83 at 35 years old, and Ross Carter would not drop at all. So those were the 3 guys left that were kind of guys that were there way back at the beginning. So at the 2038 draft, we would pick up Cristiano Pino at 18th, who was a 69 overall medium top 4 offensive defenseman. This guy did get to play the last 2 seasons, I think, but I didn't track his stats, but I could potentially still track his stats. But yeah, anyways, we picked him up. At the resign stage, we would release Mark Ward, who was basically playing our top 6 defensive role with Israel Henry. And we would sign top 4 defenseman Mikhail Jaskin to replace Israel Henry, just to give us a bit more solidity, is that a word, on our defensive core. So the 2038-39 season, so Mark Darmour would drop to an 81 overall and an exact top 6 defenseman. Sam Sturdwick would stay as an 83, as I previously mentioned, and Ross Carter was a 92 exact elite to start this year. We'd finish the season 40-3, 29, 7-3, which is good for 9th place, so we still played pretty decent. 93 points, it was a bit better than last year. Our goals for was 3.05 goals for per game, which seems like it was really good, but it was only 10th in the entire league because offense was completely up that season. We had a 2.66 goals against average, which was good for 8th. So yeah, you could see kind of based on that goals against average that the league was scoring a lot more goals than normal. Our power play percentage was 19%, so we kind of struggled on the man advantage, and our penalty kill was 81.6%. Our leader in points, once again, was Henrik Hjalmarsson, who missed a couple games during the season due to injury. He played 77 games with 46 goals, 50 assists for 86 points. In the playoffs, we would face off against the Calgary Flames again in the first round of the playoffs, so the team who outstood us in the second round the year prior to this. We would win against them in 7 games because just like last year, they did not have their starting goaltender because he was out with an injury. It just seems weird that this goaltender of theirs would get injured back-to-back years right near the end of the season or something and miss the entire first round. So once again, we didn't have to face off against this guy, but this time around, we managed to win in 7 games. Now into round 2, we were facing against the Los Angeles Kings, who were a very deep team. They were insane looking. And yeah, we got swept by them just because they made mincemeat out of our deep team as well. And yeah, they basically went on, I think, to they went into the conference finals, but they would not get to the cup finals yet. So the St. Louis Blues would go on to win the Stanley Cup over the Philadelphia Flyers in 7 games. And what's kind of actually cool about them winning the Stanley Cup this year is this technically season was the 2018-19 season, because it's technically 20 years after the 1998-99 season, which was technically year number 1. So technically St. Louis actually won the cup in the season that they did in real life, but this time it was over the Flyers in 7 instead of the Bruins. So kind of an interesting little fact there. So Mark Darmour would drop to an 80 overall. Sam Stardwick would drop to an 82 top 6 defenseman. So both those guys were dropping. It looked like they were running out of time in their career. Former player Rylan Keefe would retire at 35 years old in Germany with 1,075 games played, 149 goals, 563 assists for 712 points. So he was a pretty good player. Mostly a guy that would pass the puck, it seems like. Also, former backup goaltender Vic Graves would retire at 35. At the 2039 draft, we would take Norm Ward, who was a medium top 6 forward. One of those guys that we would not get to see because we would run out of time before he would actually get to play in the NHL. At the re-sign stage, we would release top 6 defenseman Vasilyev, who I mentioned we picked up his depth a couple seasons back. He eventually became a top 6 defenseman for us. At free agency, we would sign a two-way defender in Kang to replace Vasilyev. So to start the 2039-40 season, Ross Carter would drop to a 92 exact starter, so his potential went from elite to a starter. Mark Darmour would stay at an 80, but he would drop to an exact 7th D, while Sam Stardwick would stay at an 82 top 6 defenseman. This team would start strong, but drop a lot in December and January. Sam Stardwick would post his 1,000th career point in a 4-0 win versus the San Jose Sharks on Valentine's Day of 2040. We would finish the season 38, 29, 11, and 4, which was good for 13th, so just barely into the playoffs with 87 points. We averaged 2.83 goals for per game, which was good for 16th. Our goals against was still really good. Ross Carter, even though he was getting up there in age, still playing like a brick. With a 2.55 goals against average, we finished 5th in that. Our power play was really bad, going 17%, and our penalty kill was also pretty bad, going at 79.6%. So, our defense was good, but on the special teams and stuff, we struggled a lot, and our offense was not really the greatest either. Our leader in points was Henrik Hjalmarsson, who once again missed a couple games, he missed 1 game to injury, but he did put up still 73 points, 37 goals, 36 assists in that span. In round 1, we would face off against the Dallas Stars, and we would lose to them in overtime in Game 7, as Mark Darmour took a bad penalty, and we thought that was the end of Mark Darmour's career, and it was it was just not a good time. So yeah, we lost in 7 games, and it was goddamn, we could lose a lot of players to retirement. That was not the type of penalty you want to take, Mark. Anyways, the AHL affiliate would go on to win the Calder Cup for the first time in quite a long time, so that was nice to see. The LA Kings would take home the Stanley Cup over the Ottawa Senators in 6 games, so there's LA winning a cup after last year being in the conference finals and losing to St. Louis. The retirements, this one came to a bit of a shock as Sam Stardwick decided to actually hang them up at 36 years old, and I thought this guy was going to play till at least 38, but he would retire at 36 years old. Over his regular season career, he played 1,368 games with 235 goals, 781 assists for 1,016 points. We'll get more into his stuff down the road, when I do the player recap. We would also lose former 7th round pick Valery Gerbeshkov, and Valery played 1,249 games with us. He scored 299 goals, so close to 300, and he also had 613 assists for 912 points. Former player Alexander Zubov, who beat us with the Canes to win the Stanley Cup way back, he would retire with 1,108 games played, 235 goals, 302 assists for 537 points. At the 2040 draft, we would draft another top 6 forward, that being Norm Farrell. This guy, like I said, none of these guys are ever going to play, the ones that I'm mentioning in the draft now on, because we're so late in this GM mode, there's only 3 more seasons technically after this. At the re-sign stage, we did not let go of anybody, and in free agency, we decided to pick up a replacement for Sam Stardwick. So because we lost Sam Stardwick, who had such an offensive presence on our team, we needed to pick up an offensive defenseman. So we picked up 34-year-old Gustav Chubarov, who had won 3 Norris trophies going into the season. So we're this guy would just fill the void perfectly, even though he's older. So we brought him in to fill the void of Sam Strudwick. So for the 2040-41 season, we would also experience some more drop-offs. So Ross Carter would drop to an 86 overall exact fringe starter, so he was starting to go on his decline. Mark Darmour would drop to a 75 overall, and being so, he would have to be playing in the AHL because he was way too weak to be playing in the NHL. Henrik Hjalmarsson would be named captain because Sam Strudwick would retire that prior season. Just because of how he's been playing in like the last 5 years, or since he started his career, he was like leading a team in points almost every year. And then long-term players Jokela and Schuster would be named the alternate captains. During the season, the team would lose Ross Carter to injury 2 times, and as a result, we would make the playoffs by only 1 point, because like I said, when we don't have Ross Carter, this team struggles a lot. So we'd make the playoffs just by 1 point only. And this division was super strong too. Like, I've never seen a division so strong. Like, there's only 5 points separating second place in 7th place, which is ridiculous. So that's the main reason why we literally just barely made the playoffs, because our divisional rivals and stuff were insane. In the AHL, Mark Darmour would still have a good season despite his age, putting up 16 goals, 14 assists for 30 points in 68 games. So to finish the season, we finished 39, 31, 9, and 3, which was good for 13th with 87 points. We were tied for 10th in goals for with 3 goals per game. And we were 11th in goals against with 2.73 because Ross Carter was kind of dropping off a bit. Power play percentage was really good, 23.9%, but the penalty kill was struggling, 78.4%. Once again, Henrik Hjalmarsson would lead us in points with 54 goals, 44 assists for 98 points. In the playoffs, we'd once again have to face off against the Los Angeles Kings, and once again we got obliterated by them as they would sweep us because they were the defending Stanley Cup champions. Ross Carter was also showing his age in that playoff series, and when the team took way too much penalties, which LA would capitalize on, so that's the main reason we lost, is because our penalty kill just did not do anything at all, and Ross Carter just started showing his age a lot too. However, Mark Darmour in the AHL affiliate would win the Calder Cup this season, so that was nice. That was the second straight season for the Colorado AHL affiliate to win. Anyways, Mark was credited with the game-winning goal in game number 6 that won the Calder Cup. So that was pretty interesting. Like, I was actually doing like the in-game simulation type of thing, so I saw that Mark Darmour made it like 3-2 or something like that, and then I watched the last bit of it, so it was kind of cool to see him win a Calder Cup at the end of his career. The Ottawa Senators would win the Stanley Cup over the Los Angeles Kings in a rematch of the previous season, so that's the first time I've seen 2 teams play each other in back-to-back seasons other than in real life with like Detroit and Pittsburgh, so that was pretty cool. So the free agent signing Gustav Chubarov would win his 4th Norris Trophy, so we brought him in for 1 year or 2 years I think it was, and he would win a Norris, so that was pretty nice to have him help contribute after losing somebody like Sam Strudwick, because you can't really replace Sam Strudwick, but you could at least get somebody to win a Norris in replacement. Henrik Hjalmarsson would win his 2nd Richard of his career with his 54 goals he posted this season. So former players Raimo Kuda would retire with Finland at 36 years old. He'd play 869 games with 190 goals, 418 assists for 608 points. Another former player, and that's Raymond Galchenyuk, not Ryland. I keep saying Ryland, I think, because of Ryland Keefe, but Raymond Galchenyuk, he was the guy that we traded to Boston. He would retire as a free agent at 36 with 1,135 games played, 136 goals, 441 assists for 577 points. And then Mark Darmour, who I was just mentioning won a Calder Cup at the end of his career, would retire at 38 years old with 1,470 games played, 153 goals, 273 assists for 426 points. We'll get more into his stuff down the road. Former player Declan Hills also retired in Sweden. I'm going to read his stats, but anyways, he retired there. Also, former depth guy Chris Petrovic would retire at 33 years old. Former pick Emmanuel Darling, who I think we had maybe as a depth forward on our team, he also would retire as a free agent. Former goaltending prospect Liam Gunnarsson would retire. Yeah, so on to the 2041 draft. Not that it matters much. We drafted a center, Thomas Gilson, who was a medium top 6 forward prospect, so we picked up another forward. We'd release Nichols and we'd release Obergauer. Nichols would sign in Finland for 3 years at 2.34, and Obergauer would sign in Calgary for 1 year at 1.115. We did not sign anybody in free agency this year because more youngsters jumping into the NHL. So for the 2041-42 season, Ross Carter would drop a bit more, even though he would drop to an exact backup, so his potential changed, but he would still stay in 86 overall because of statistical growth from the year before, because year before he had a really good season, so he stayed the 86, but he just dropped in potential, so that was big for him. Offensive defenseman prospect Cristiano Pino, who I mentioned we drafted a few years ago, made the NHL as an 81 overall at 21 years old, so pretty good for a top 4 defensive prospect. We would finish the season 47, 26, 7, and 2, which was good for 101 points in 3rd place. We finished with 3.06 goals for per game, which was good for 8th. 2.35 goals against per game, so once again we finished first best in terms of goals against. We had a 25.4% on the power play, which was insane, and our penalty kill was 84.7%, so we were pretty good in terms of every single thing, even special teams. Our leader in points was Henrik Hjalmarsson again with 46 goals, 50 assists for 96 points. In the playoffs, we would face off against the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim, and once again, Ross Carter would start to show his age in the playoffs as we lose in 6 games despite having home ice. The Florida Panthers would go on to win the Stanley Cup in 7 games over the Dallas Stars. Despite losing in the first round, Ross Carter and backup Magnus Lindberg would win the Jennings this season, so that was pretty nice. Gustav Chubarov would retire, the guy that we signed for last season at One Norris. He would retire this season with 1,437 games played, 137 goals, 719 assists for 856 points. In his 2 seasons with us, though, this is kind of surprising actually. He played 164 games, put up 16 goals, had 94 assists for 110 points, so this guy was kind of close to point per game as an offensive defenseman for us. He was also a career plus 49 with us, and had only 4 penalty minutes, so this guy was pretty good. Like, he was worth that signing. Former player Gaspar Boudreau, who we traded quite a few years ago, retired as a free agent with 615 games played, 68 goals, 121 assists for 189 points. Former depth defenseman Dominic Puck retired. So the 2042 draft, we would draft Walker Pera, who was a medium top 6'4 prospect, so we picked up more forward prospects. We would release defenseman 83 overall Kang, who was the guy we signed a couple seasons back. And we would sign 88 overall Jerome Deschamplain, who was the 2-way defenseman, just to give our team a bit more of a better overall in terms of defense. Like, Deschamplain could replace Chubarov, but he wouldn't have been as good offensively. Now for the 2042-43 season, which is the final year in the entire GM mode, Ross Carter would drop to an exact backup at 39 years old and be an 84 overall. So this was his last year because this was the last year of the GM mode. He did not retire by the end of it, but anyways. The team would start off slow because of the goals against. We would go 3-6, 1-1. But the team would then rebound in November and December, going 14-10, 3-1, and we would just barely make the playoffs in the last season as well, going 38, 31, 8-5, which was good for 12th with 84 points. In goals for, we had 3.12, which was good for 9th, 2.082 goals against, which was good for 15th, so not really good in terms of defense. Our power play was 20.8%. And our penalty kill was really bad at 77.3%. Once again, our leader in points was Henrik Hjalmarsson with 49 goals, 47 assists for 96 points. In round 1, we'd have to face off against the President's Trophy winning Detroit Red Wings, and yeah, that was kind of not a good way to have for our last playoffs. We were also without Stu DiPietro, because of a late injury in the season, but he would return for game number 4. So in game number 5, Ross Carter would be injured and he would miss 1 month of NHL action, so he wouldn't be able to come back till the conference finals if we were to even get there. So yeah, that was not good. We almost came back from a 3-1 deficit. We forced that game 7, but we lost in 7 games, unfortunately, and we just could not get another Stanley Cup by the end of this GM mode. Finland would win their 2nd Stanley Cup versus Detroit in that finals. Nichols was a part of that Finland team that won the Stanley Cup, but they would sweep Detroit, so we lost to the best team in the West, just like what happens a lot of the time. So that is the recaps of the seasons. I don't know how long that was. Hopefully it wasn't too long for you guys, because that was a lot of information. Now I'm going to tell you guys a bit about some players' career stats, and then that'll be pretty much it. We start off with actually award winners on who won Stanley Cups and all that stuff. So we were the team that was in the Stanley Cup Finals the most. We had 5 appearances in the Stanley Cup Finals, going 3-2. The next closest was Detroit, who had 3 appearances, going 2-1. And then there was a couple teams that won 1-2 in the Stanley Cup Finals, those being the Philadelphia Flyers, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Los Angeles Kings, and the Dallas Stars. The New Jersey Devils, the Czech Republic, and the Finland team all went 2-0 in Stanley Cup Finals, which is pretty nice. Then there was a couple teams that went 1-1, which was Boston, Washington, Buffalo, Germany, Carolina, St. Louis, and Ottawa. And then there was 3 teams that went 1-0 in Stanley Cup Finals, like they only had 1 appearance, those being San Jose, the Islanders, and the Florida Panthers. And then you get into the teams that never won when they went to the Stanley Cup Finals. That was Toronto, Chicago, Sweden, Anaheim, and then Edmonton went 0-2 in Stanley Cup Finals. And there was only 5 or 6 teams that never went to the Stanley Cup Finals by the end of this GM mode, those being the Montreal Canadiens, the Nashville Predators, the New York Rangers, the Phoenix Coyotes, and the Tampa Bay Lightning, and then also the Vancouver Canucks. In terms of individual awards, I'm just going to mention the ones that we had. So we actually almost won every single award at least once, which is pretty crazy. So basically, the awards that we won as a team, we won 3 Stanley Cups, as I was just mentioning. We won 4 President's Trophies. We won a total of 5 Clarence S. Campbell Bowls, which is pretty crazy as well. We won a total of 5 Art Rosses, all from Peter Forsberg. We won a total of 6 Hart Memorial Trophies, 5 of those from Forsberg, 1 of those from Ross Carter. The James Norris, we won a total of 5 times, 4 from Sam Strebek, once from Gustav Chubarov, who we signed for that 2 seasons that he played with us. We won the Lady Byng 1 year as well. Valery Gerbeshkov won 1 season. We won 2 Calders, Sam Strebek winning 1 year, and Henrik Hjalmarsson winning 1 year. We won 3 Conn Smythes, Joe Sakic with 1, Ryland Keefe with 1, and Ross Carter with 1. We won a total of 5 Vezinas, 1 from Patrick Waugh before he retired, and then 4 from Ross Carter. We won a total of 4 Jennings, 3 of them from just Ross Carter, and then 1 of them was combined between Ross Carter and Mr. Lindbergh. We won a total of 6 Lindsays, 5 of them from Peter Forsberg, 1 of them from Ross Carter, and then we won a total of 5 Richards, including 3 from Joe Sakic and 2 from Henrik Hjalmarsson. So we won quite a bit of awards. The only awards we didn't win were the Masterton and the Selke Trophy, but the Selke was mainly due to because there was one guy, Frank Walzer, if you guys remember him. He won at least 11. Yeah, he won 11 Selke trophies. And then there was a couple other guys like LaRose who won multiple, so it was very tough to win the Selke trophy. Okay, so now let's get into the actual 1998-99 player stats, like the ones that retired. So there was actually there's a lot of players in this build, so I'm only going to list off some of the more big ones. So yeah, I'm not going to list everybody over 1,000 points. How should I do this? So the guy that retired with the most points in this entire franchise mode was Vincent Lecavalier, just because of how young he was when he started in this in this build. I think he was 19. So he played 1,693 games. He put up 616 goals, 761 assists for 1,377 points. And yeah, he retired in the second last season. Or not in the second last season, like in the third or fourth last season. In terms of busts, I might as well list off a few of them. So Peter Forsberg, let's get to his stats. So Peter Forsberg was very good for us, as I was just mentioning with the awards. He played 984 games with 332 goals, 585 assists for 917 points. And then also in the playoffs, he had 127 games played, 49 goals, 66 assists for 115 points. So yeah, this guy was just an insane guy for us. And then Joe Sakic as well, I guess I'll tell you his stats. And then also I'll tell you Patrick Waugh's, but the rest of those guys, there's a lot of guys. If you want to know anybody in particular, let me know in the comments, because I could let you guys know. So Joe Sakic played 876 games with 373 goals, 407 assists for 780 points. He also had 127 playoff games, 52 goals, 57 assists for 109 points. And then we get into the goaltenders, like, where is Patrick Roy? So Patrick Roy, I didn't actually update his playoff stats, unfortunately, but during the regular season, he played 496 games, going 280, 146 in 13. He also had 43 shutouts, a 928 save percentage, and a 2.09 goals against average. So he was really good, one of the best goaltenders in this build for sure. In terms of other goaltenders you guys might want to know about, Martin Brodeur is definitely one of the ones you should want to know about. So 710 games played, he went 373, 217, and 27. He had 82 shutouts, a 925 save percentage, and a 2.15 goals against average. And in the playoffs, he was also insane, going 53, 25, and 10 with 8 shutouts, a 931 save percentage, and a 1.95 goals against average. So yeah, that's the goaltenders you guys want to know about. If there's anybody else, though, let me know in the comments, like I said. Let's get into our EA generated guys, the ones that we've drafted. So first and foremost, let's start off with Ross Carter, who was arguably one of the best goaltenders in NHL history. So in his career, he won 1 Calder Cup, he won 1 Butterfield Trophy, which is the best player in the playoffs in the AHL. He won a total of, how much Stanley Cups was it? 3 Stanley Cups with us. He won a total of 4 Vezinas and 4 Jennings. He also won 1 Lindsay, 1 Hart, as I was mentioning, and 1 Jennings. Wait, what was the other one? I don't even remember, but I know he's won multiple awards anyways. So yeah, he had a really good career. By the end of his career, though, for career stats, since he didn't retire technically by the end of it, he played 1,204 games, going 633, 368, and 41. He also had 140 ties, so he tied a lot more than lost in overtime. He had 119 shutouts, which is the second most in NHL history, right behind Martin Brodeur. He had a 925 save percentage and a 2.26 goals against average. He only allowed a total of 2,656 goals on 35,348 shots. And he had 29 assists in his career as well, so he was a good passer for a goaltender. Then you move on to his playoff career. It kind of went up a bit because of his last 3 seasons in the NHL. So in 198 playoff games, he went 104, 70, and 24 with no ties, obviously, because there's no ties in the playoffs. He had 19 shutouts also during that span, a 922 save percentage, and a 2.35 goals against average. He allowed 449 goals on 6,050 shots in the playoffs. And he also had only 2 assists in the postseason as well. Now we move on to Henrik Hjalmarsson, who you guys never got to see play, but he played I think it's 3, 6, 9, 10 seasons with us for the end of the GM mode. He played 811 games, but over those 811 games, he had 446 goals, 396 assists for 842 points, so he was over point per game in his career. And yeah, he was looking like he would have been probably a player that would have been coming close to 700, 800 goals by the end of his career, I think. He was also a career plus 213, so very good in his defensive end. He had 289 penalty minutes, so he wasn't very physical, averaging 30 penalty minutes a season. He had a really good career shooting percentage as well, going 15.74%. He had 134 power play goals, so this guy was a very good power play specialist. He had multiple seasons with 17 power play goals. One season with 16 power play goals. He was really good on the man advantage. He had 73 game-winning goals, so he was doing what he could to win games for the team. And yeah, he was also doing good in takeaways. His first 4 seasons, he wasn't the greatest in takeaways, but then ever since the 2037 season, he put up 100 plus takeaways a season, so he started playing good in his own end as well. In his playoff career, just because of his first season, which he had 20 goals in 25 games, he put up 102 points in 109 playoff games, including 52 goals, 50 assists, so he was just under point per game in the playoffs. He was a career plus 14 as well, had 50 penalty minutes, and his shooting percentage dropped off from the regular season to an 11.46%. He had 21 playoff power play goals and 8 game-winning playoff goals. Once again, he was good in the takeaways in the playoffs, going 63 giveaways to 101 takeaways. Next, we get into Toni Jokela, who played 1,037 games with us. He had 148 goals, 456 assists for 604 points. He might have started his career really good, like he had a couple 50, 60 point seasons, but over the last, I think it was the last 5 seasons of the GM mode, he literally put up like 40 to 30 points a season. So he started dropping a lot in production, even though his overall wasn't changing. So I don't know if it was ice time or what that did that for him. His shooting percentage wasn't good because he was more of a passer, so he had a .915 shooting percentage. He had 30 power play goals, 4 shorthanded goals, so he was good on the shorthanded unit. And he also had 23 game-winning goals. He was actually really good for takeaways, though, as well, with 1,212 career takeaways. Then we get on to Lars Sjöström, who was our 13th overall pick back in 2029. He played 902 games with us, and he had 319 goals, 383 assists for 702 points. He was actually a really interesting player because to start his career, he pretty much averaged around 50, 60 points, and he was doing really good for those 3 years. And in the last 3 seasons, he just came out of nowhere pretty much, and he put up 74 points in 2040-41, 81 points in 2041-42, and then 83 points in the final season. He was also a career plus 209 and only had 295 penalty minutes. His shooting percentage was also pretty good, 15.24%. He had 87 power play goals, no shorthanded goals, and 48 game winners. He was actually a bit more physical because he had 827 hits. He had also 128 block shots, 419 giveaways, and 372 takeaways. So he wasn't as good at takeaways, but he was still good at production and playing defensively because he never was a minus player. Then we get into Stu DiPietro, who I called DP for some reason as his nickname. He was a 6th round pick back in 2026 at 172nd overall, so this guy was a pretty big steal. He played 1,094 games, but he kind of missed a lot of the last 10 years or so with injury problems. Like ever since the 35-36 season, he missed quite a bit of games. Like one season he played 69 games, the next season 70 games, then 75, then 77, and 79. Then he played a full season, but then it went back to 79 and 73. So as he was getting older, he kind of became a bit more fragile, you could say. Over those 1,094 games, he scored only 46 goals, but he had 191 assists for 237 points. So this guy was more of the defensive defenseman, averaging around 15 to 20 points a season. He was a career plus 253, so that was a very big help for him as well. He was a minus player only twice in his career, which was once his rookie season, which he was a -3, and then he was a -5 in 2037-38, but other than that, he was very good in his own end. He was also pretty physical with 656 penalty minutes. His shooting percentage, because he didn't have a lot of goals, was only 3.89%. 14 of his 46 goals were on the power play. 6 of his goals were game winners. He was also, like I was just saying, very physical. 1,900 hits in his career. 1,518 block shots. So he was almost basically like a Mark Darmore, but he was not as good offensively, it seems like. He was also pretty decent for takeaways for a defenseman. Like he had 439 takeaways to 917 giveaways, so almost halfway between, like almost like one giveaway or 2 giveaways to 1 takeaway type of idea. Next we get into Tim Law, who is that 3rd round guy that I was mentioning, that elite guy. He actually was an interesting player as well. Like he started his career off kind of slow, but once he started playing on the top line and whatnot, he started to catch fire quite a bit. So in 656 career games, he had 149 goals, 340 assists for 489 points. The last 3 seasons, just like Sjöström, he was like really good. He had 84 points one year, then 88 the next year, and then 91 the final year. So he was starting to come into his own quite a bit. He was also a career plus 135, had 229 penalty minutes, but he was very physical. Like, he didn't have a lot of penalty minutes, but he just threw a lot of hits. Like, it was pretty crazy. Like, I watched one game and he just completely destroyed one guy. But yeah, he had 949 hits in those 656 games. He also blocked 107 shots, and he had 705 takeaways in comparison to his 290 giveaways. So this guy was a very good defensive player, and then he could also produce. Next up is Noel Tamura, who was more of a fourth liner for us for his entire career. He had 199 points in 738 games. And he was only a career plus 32. Like, he wasn't really the greatest player. Like, he was solid enough to play a fourth line role, but he wasn't really that much of a steal at 30th overall like we thought he would be. Like, he was a 75 out of the draft, but it took him a few years to develop, and then he was averaging around, I think it's like 15 to 20 points a season. And then his highest point totals was in his third year, where he had 33 points. So yeah, he wasn't the greatest player, but yeah, anyways, he was decent. Then on to Nicholas Bullum, who was drafted 23rd overall in 2031, which was the year before Tamura. He was kind of an interesting one as well, because I thought he was going to fit into that like second line role kind of, but he didn't really do that. Like, in his second and third year, he had 56 and 57 points, but after that, he never reached that again. He had 383 points in 735 games by the end of his career. 174 of those were goals, 209 were assists. But this guy was actually a really good short-handed player, and that's more what we used him as, because since he had like this sniper attribute, like, he was a pretty good player to put on that penalty killing unit. Good defensive awareness. He could potentially score short-handed goals. So we put him on there, and he put up 9 short-handed goals by the end of his career, so he definitely helped out this team in terms of the penalty kill. The penalty kill did struggle quite a few years, but he did score goals, so that was nice to see him score short-handed ones. He also was very physical with 1,045 hits. He blocked 161 shots and had 374 takeaways to 355 giveaways. Then we get into Neil Ballard, who was a third-round pick, 92nd overall in 2034. He had 154 points in 492 games, was a career minus 39, and yeah, he was just not the greatest player really at all. But he was a low top 6 forward player that only grew, I think, to like an 80 at the highest. But he was still pretty good to have as a fourth liner. Just didn't play the greatest defensively. Like, he was a minus mostly every year in his career. Then we have Christian Petterstrom, who was drafted 25th overall in 2033. He had 225 points in 656 games. His career high was 42 points, but after that he kind of dropped back down to 29, 26 points. I think it was mainly due to ice time though, because like I didn't really play this guy on the top 6 that much. He was a career plus 25, had 825 shots, which put his shooting percentage out at 10.91%. He had 1 short-handed goal, 18 game winners, never played on the power play, so he didn't get any power play goals. And he had 879 hits, so this guy was a very physical player, but he didn't take a whole lot of penalty minutes. He blocked 118 shots. He had 387 takeaways to 315 giveaways. Then we have Tyrone Sabrin, who played a total of 493 games with us, mostly on the third and fourth line, I think. He had 100 points in 493 games. He was a career plus 28. His shooting percentage was down to a 7.37%, which isn't the greatest. He had only 1 power play goal and 10 game-winning goals. He had 500 hits in those 493 games, so just averaging over a hit a game. And his giveaway to takeaway ratio wasn't greatest. He had 233 giveaways to 222 takeaways, so it's kind of close. And he also blocked 77 shots. So yeah, he never really panned out to be anything huge, but he was okay. And then we also have Magnus Lindberg, who was our backup goaltender to Ross Carter. He was kind of a streaky goaltender because to start his career, he just had some really bad seasons, like an 888 save percentage and an 887 save percentage. But then in his last like 2 seasons, he had like a 939 save percentage and a 929 save percentage. So he kind of played really good near the end. As doing so, he won a Jennings with Ross Carter in 2042. Over his 136 games, he won 60, 53, and 3 with 12 ties. He had 8 shutouts, a 908 save percentage, and a 2.76 goals against average. He also allowed 334 goals on 3,664 shots, and he had 5 assists in his career as well. Now you're wondering probably about some of the other former guys that we used to have that eventually left. Let's get those stats. So first and foremost, Sam Strubik, who I mentioned earlier his point total, but I'll mention it again. He was a 5th round pick of ours back in 2022 at 149th overall. He played 1,368 games with 235 goals, 781 assists for 1,016 points. He was also a career plus 316, which is insane, and he only had 56 penalty minutes. The most penalty minutes he had in a season was 6. Like, this guy did not take penalties at all. He also had 3,457 shots, and his shooting percentage was a 7.09. He had 59 power play goals, 1 short-handed goal, 46 game-winning goals, 312 hits, 1,776 block shots, 1,057 giveaways to 485 takeaways. He won 1 Calder Cup back in the first year that he was playing. He also won a total of 3 Stanley Cups with us. He won the Calder 1 year. He won 4 Norris trophies. He could have won the Norris in other years because he led in points, but he wasn't as good in terms of plus minus, and that was the deciding factor between the two of them, because I think Rohan Sutter beat him out a couple of seasons. So yeah, he was overall a very good player in the regular season, and then also in the playoffs he was pretty good too. He played 217 playoff games with us, 36 goals, 110 assists for 146 points. He was also a career plus 30 and had 18 penalty minutes in the playoffs. His shooting percentage would drop to a 6.31% in the playoffs as well. He had 9 power play goals, no shorthanded goals, and 7 game winners. He threw 62 hits, had 290 block shots, had 182 giveaways to 92 takeaways. Then we get into Valery Gerbeshkov, who was a 7th round pick in 216th overall, literally the second last pick of the draft, and that was the year after we lost the Stanley Cup Finals to the Boston Bruins, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, Gerbeshkov would win 2 Stanley Cups with us. He would also win the Lady Byng. He didn't win any Calder Cup in the AHL, but he did come in a year after that, so he got to play with some really good players down there. But yeah, anyways, in his career, I mentioned his points before, but again, 1,249 games played, 299 goals, 613 assists for 912 points. He was also a career plus 149, had 499 penalty minutes. His shooting percentage for like a playmaker, two-way forward kind of guy was 10.01%. He had 75 power play goals, 2 shorthanded goals, and 54 game winners. He had 1,102 hits, 332 block shots. His takeaway count was insane, like I was mentioning that earlier in like the older episodes, but he had 1,753 takeaways to 741 giveaways. Like, this guy was a takeaway machine. In the playoffs, he was also pretty good with 195 games played under his belt. He had 46 goals, 95 assists for 141 points. He was also a career plus 7 in the playoffs, so he was kind of struggling a bit defensively in the postseason, but whatever. He had 85 penalty minutes, 454 shots, 1,006. Oh my god. A shooting percentage of 10.61%, 15 power play goals, no shorthanded goals, 7 game winners, 181 hits, 42 block shots, 129 giveaways, and 268 takeaways. And the final player I want to talk about is Mark Darmour. Mark Darmour played the most games out of anybody, 1,470 games played with us. Never played in the AHL until the final year where he played and won the Calder Cup. So yeah, anyways, he had 153 career goals, 273 assists for 426 points. He was a career plus 285 and had 870 penalty minutes. He had a 5.94 shooting percentage, so he was definitely a better goal scorer than Stu DiPietro was. He had 32 power play goals, 4 short-handed goals, and 24 game winners. He had 2,145 hits, 1,950 block shots, 1,260 giveaways to 573 takeaways. So, I mean, this guy was actually a pretty good defensive defenseman, but he also could put up points. Like, his best point production season was 30 points in the AHL, but in the NHL, it was 31 points back in 2031-32. Actually, no, 33 points in 2028-29, but yeah, this guy averaged like pretty much 20-30 points a season, so he was pretty good. He won 2 Stanley Cups with us, won 1 Calder Cup in the AHL, and never won any other awards because he wasn't that good of offensively. I wish he would have won more awards, but he did not, unfortunately. In terms of the playoffs, he had 55 points in 238 games. He was a plus 24. Once again, he was actually pretty good in terms of defensive production. 333 hits, 303 block shots, 99 takeaways to 181 giveaways. So he was taking the puck away quite a bit in comparison to normal defensemen. So yeah, guys, that is our player stats for this GM mode. If you guys want to know anybody else's stats, let me know. I have an entire spreadsheet about it. Yeah, I think that's going to do it for this recap. I don't know how long this video has been. Hopefully it hasn't been too long, because if not, I might have to re-record this and all that stuff. So anyways, thank you guys for being here throughout this entire Colorado Avalanche Franchise Mode series. It's been a lot of fun, a lot of interesting players. I'm really excited for NHL 20 and see who we get and all that stuff, like at the drafts. Just, it's going to be a lot harder because of the coaching and all that stuff, but it's going to be a good challenge, I think, for sure. So anyways, let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in NHL 20.